but I can see the good in most people. I must admit there are some people I have a harder time seeing the light in, but
So how do you see the light when the light doesn't shine as brightly? Do you have any strategies?
I think one thing that I try to do is I try to hold them in the light. That is something else that we do. If someone's sick, I will write to them and say, I will hold you in the light, meaning I will try to imagine. I mean, it's only an imagination thing for me, and maybe real for some people, that I am enfolding that person in a light that might lift them up, might help them feel better. Do I believe that prayer will cure a person? It can.
Hi, I'm Patrick Parker, and you're listening to the Becoming Who You Truly Are podcast, a show that helps us all live more authentic lives. This week, I am super honored to be talking to a very special person who I first met almost 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, and her name is Nancy Walker. During Nancy's long career, she was a Fulbright Scholar to Germany, and she also taught in China alongside of her 33-year tenure at UNC Greensboro. And her former students can be heard all over the United States. In this episode, Nancy is going to tell us about her journey to letting her life speak authentically, taking a big leap and changing her college major from English to music, meeting her husband at age 27, and putting down roots in Greensboro, North Carolina, where she had children and she found a community in the Quaker faith tradition. Nancy's going to inspire us all that we can be lifelong learners through the things we read, the places we go, and the people we meet. And in that lifelong learning, we can find deep truths that help us become more of who we truly are. It's a little weird to call you Nancy instead of Dr. Walker like I did when I was 20, but it's great to have you, and thank you so much for doing this with me.
It's my honor and pleasure, Patrick, and I love that you call me Nancy. That's a very Quakerly thing to do, by the way.
Here in Norway, we have this idea that of janteloven, which basically means you're not to think that you're better than anyone else. So it's a very flat system, which I think might be somewhat the same in the Quaker tradition.
That's exactly right. We try to avoid hierarchical kinds of constructions. That's not always possible, of course, but, everyone has a say. There is that of God in everyone. All of those things are very important to Quakers. And so we are all equal in some ways.
Well, let's go back to the Quaker topics at the very end. But first, every time that I watch Harry Potter and I see Professor McGonagall, I think of you.
Oh, dear. Is that a good thing?
I think so. She has a lot of special powers and a very important role toward the end. Do you know the series at all?
I do. I watched them. Yeah. Well, she's a wonderful actress. I like that.
You look like her a little bit, and
she was a good person in the end, wasn't she? I'll take it.
And I know that you just got back from seeing the solar eclipse. So how was that? Tell us about the solar eclipse.
It was astonishing. I had never seen a full eclipse. Especially, I had the special glasses so we could really look at it, and not hurt our eyes. And so we were just thrilled to be able to go somewhere where we could see the entire thing. We went out into a meadow outside. It turned out to be a beautiful day, which was a surprise because we thought it was going to be raining and cloudy. And it turned out not to do that. It was just perfect. And so we sat in the meadow for 2.5 hours because we wanted to be there for sure when it started. And so we had our glasses and watched it gradually come across. It was so slow and so almost imperceptible until it got full. And then for 4 minutes, I couldn't believe it would last that long. For 4 minutes, we couldn't see the sun. And it got dark. We saw stars. The birds stopped singing. The frogs started croaking. The wind changed. It smelled different. It smelled like the flowers of the flowering trees suddenly kind of wafted past us. It was just, it was a moving experience and almost spiritual, I think, because it was just so unusual. And I thought about people who didn't know about science or in the ages past, what they must have thought when that happened.
That the world was ending, maybe.
The world was over. That's just very astonishing. But we loved it. It was a lot of fun.
Okay, before we go into the three main points that we are going to talk about today, why don't you tell us a little about you and how you grew up, the generation you grow up in? Give us some context for us, babies that don't know life before the internet. So tell us a little bit about who you were before these three major turning points in your life happened in your 20s and later on.
Well, I grew up in the same little town in Nebraska that I was born in. I'd lived there until I went to college. It was in Gibbon, Nebraska, and it's a town of about 1,000 people. My father was the hardware merchant, and my mother was a stay-at-home mom until she started teaching math in 7th grade, and she was my 7th grade math teacher. You can imagine. I didn't call her anything. I didn't call her Mrs. Walker. I didn't call her Mom. I just said, raise my hand. But anyway, she was a good teacher.
As if 7th grade isn't awkward enough already.
Right. It's such an easy time. But I had her for 2 years in math. And so that's how I grew up. I did all the usual things. I rode my bike. We had no cell phones, of course. The phone on the wall was a dial. And when I was younger, you picked up the receiver to connect to another phone by talking to the operator.
Okay.
To talk to my friend Sarah, I said, red 55. That was her phone number. My phone number was blue 69.
Okay, so you didn't have like the 7 digits. You had a color and numbers. Okay.
Yeah.
Very different.
Very different. And so then they would plug you into that person and you talk. We were lucky we had a single party line. We were not in a group party line. So our conversations were private. But it was people talk about wanting the simpler time that they grew up in. I'm not sure that that's right. It had living in a small town has its own problems. Everybody knows everything about you and more than you know yourself sometimes. So that was hard.
And they all have an opinion about what they know about you.
Oh, of course. And what you should be doing about it. And why aren't you doing this? And why, and what's this thing with your mom? And, all the, everything. So, but it was idyllic in some ways because we were not afraid. We rode our bicycles out in the country. We rode them down the blacktop to the interstate. We had free reign as long as you were home, by dark or by dinner time. And I had a best friend. She's still probably my best friend. She lived a block away. Her mother was my piano teacher, one of many, but my probably most important, and my first voice teacher. So, and she was a wonderful singer. And her daughter, Sarah, my friend, is also a singer. So we had that in common from forever. And
She's a classical singer also, Sarah?
Yeah. Sarah's in San Francisco, sang at the she was I can't remember what it's called, special scholar at the San Francisco Opera. And then she sang there professionally. And she taught at Mills College in San Francisco. And we still get together whenever we can. It's kind of a long ways, but we're good friends. So
well, that makes sense that y'all were best friends. If y'all must have had some sort of soul bond, best friends that both became classical voice singers.
Isn't that wild?
From a town of 1,000 people.
In a town of 1,000 people. And we were like joined at the hip. We did everything together. She was actually 6 months younger, and so in another grade. So I taught her everything that I knew. When I would learn it in 3rd grade, I would teach it to her. And once I was in 5th grade, and she was in 4th, and she said to her teacher, I already know how to do that. It's only a smart aleck kid can do. And so the teacher said, well, why don't you just go on up to another grade then?
Okay. So then y'all were able to be together.
No, she didn't do it.
No. No.
That was just stop being a smart aleck and pay attention in class. But we survived, and so we're great friends. And we played piano duets together. That was our great fun. We were in 4-H together, which is, if you know my cooking and sewing skills, you would be astonished to know that I was in 4-H because apparently
because they're not good.
Didn't take. No, I don't cook, and I can sew a little bit.
Yeah, one of the earlier podcast episodes were with my childhood best friend, Morgan, and we were in 4-H together, and we talked about our time in 4-H. So good times in 4-H. Lots of life skills.
Yeah, well, there were some hilarious stories, but we were in a group together, and we sang together. And she had a sister, so we sang trios and duets, and we would go out to what we was affectionately called the old folks' home in Gibbon, and sing and sometimes play duets. And so we started doing that kind of thing early on. And we loved it.
So I guess your friend Sarah must have, and her mom must have somehow paved the way for you to become a musician and make a big leap in your university years.
Yes, definitely. I mean, her mother was our choir director. I was in the Presbyterian church at the time. And we sang in the choir. And so she was a huge influence and kind of like a second mom to me. She was very sweet. We spent a lot of time at each other's houses and, eating dinner. And so the reason that I went to college as an English major was because this is interesting. I was afraid to make music my major because I thought it would make me hate it. I was afraid that if I studied it, in high school and earlier, I just had fun doing music. There was very little pressure, and I knew very little. I didn't have to, we did some theory lessons, but nothing much. And I thought if I start studying it, it'll get old and boring. But it didn't. And then in my freshman year, at the end of my freshman year, I thought, what I really want to do is teach music. I always wanted to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. My sister was a teacher. It seemed like in first grade, I wanted to teach first grade. Second grade, I wanted to teach second grade, kind of like that. So I did want to definitely teach. And that's what I did. I changed my major.
That's really interesting. I've worked with a lot of volunteer musicians over the course of my career, and I often think that they love music more than I do because it's not their career. So, I think you had some sort of, you were onto something there.
I think that's true because it does make me listen to music. Well, I can listen to music and just enjoy it, but I often, especially if it's vocal music, I am critical.
You have to turn off that noise of criticism and, oh, this could be better or that, and just remember, okay, we're here to be in fellowship with them.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. So that was a good lesson to learn, and I didn't learn that early. I've learned that much since, but I was never sorry that I changed majors.
Was that scary to shift in the middle of your schooling?
Well, it should have been. I think I was too naive to know that it might be hard to do that. I was a year behind, but I finished in 4 years total, partly because I had piano and so I could do theory. I could sort of sight sing, the nuts and bolts of things that you have to be able to do. So, and I loved singing in the choir. Oh my gosh, that was fabulous. That was my first chance to travel. I went to Switzerland with the choir, and we sang in one of those great big choir gatherings that, they bring in all these college choirs. It was fabulous.
This is so fascinating to me because I remember when I was in college hearing so many of the voice majors grumbling and griping about having to sing in choir. And I also know, from my professional colleagues now that quite a few of my colleagues that teach at universities, they really don't want to be teaching and they resent it. So it's very interesting that you have such a different personality from what I've experienced as the norm.
Well, yeah, I know there's that whole thing about teaching because you can't do it, and but I don't know. I would not have been a successful opera singer just by that, and I have no. I mean, I didn't want to do that, but I also knew that I would not be particularly successful. I might have been able to sing some. I could sing some things, but to have a career as an opera singer, it's really beyond me, I think. So I think I found what I loved. And being with young people like you, that's what I remember about meeting you for the first time. My gosh, she's so young.
Oh, me? The first time you met me?
Yes.
Oh, I was the same age as everyone else in your studio. I was 18,
I know,
19.
but you were such a good organist, and I knew that, and I'd heard you play, so I knew that your skill level was very high. So when you came and you wanted to sing, I thought, well, let's see. I mean, he certainly has the musical chops, and you had this big. Do you remember? Well, of course, it's your voice. You have this big. At that time, it was a little unwieldy. Is that a fair assessment?
Still is.
Voice but my gosh, I thought, well, if you had put the amount of time that you had put into learning to play the organ, of course, that's years and years and years, you could be a great singer.
Well, I take that as a high compliment.
Well,
yeah. Just to give people a little bit of context. So I actually first met you when I was accompanying one of your students. Her name's Katie, and one of my dearest, best friends, but we met through you. And I don't know if you recommended for us to work together or someone else, but I remember we met and we went into a practice room at the university and she sang Debussy's Beau Soir. And when she opened her mouth and sang, my whole life was changed. And I became very interested in singers and singing and classical voice. And I wanted to know everything about what she was doing. And yes, so a few years later down the road, I asked you, would you help me a little bit? And you did. And so I'm not a great singer, but whatever I know is because of you mostly.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. It was fun to work with you because you were very malleable, willing to try things but asking questions too. My favorite kind of student, really.
I mean, yes, I had questions, but it was because you allowed me to, as in you fostered curiosity, and not every teacher is like that. So yeah, any questions I had was because I knew I could ask you, and
good.
You would just tell me, or we could explore, or you weren't going to look at me and roll your eyes.
Not usually. No, I love that. It's kind of that thing where, yes, I was the teacher, but I learned so much from my students, not just maybe about singing, although sometimes, or about music. People bring me music and say, I'd like to sing this. And so then I'd learn it. It was like fabulous being in school all the rest of my life, which I liked. But just learn about life, and being with young people is so, of course, I was pretty young when I started teaching, but gradually that changes, I got quite a bit older. And, but being with young people is enormously fun and interesting. And it just they say it keeps you young, but I don't know. It just keeps me engaged, and I love it. So I still have a few students.
Okay, give us some stories from your students over the years, like without naming names or giving any details, some maybe funny stories or things you learned or where they ended up, or, top 3, 4, 5 stories that come to your head on the spot?
Well, I
I like to think that Katie was a special moment in your teaching career only because I was a part of it.
yes. Well, she was kind of what you might call an old soul. She had
Absolutely.
that ability to be calm, but also be exciting as she performed. And she had all the things that you need to be a good singer, a good voice, and a good memory, and stage presence, and just all the fun things that you probably recognized right away when you heard her sing. Yeah. And, the hardest thing about teaching is that you have a student for maybe 4 years, usually that's it, and then they're gone. And they may or may not stay in touch. I love staying in touch with the students that I've had. But sometimes they come back and they have children in their arms and they don't tell me their name. And I can't remember their name. I have a terrible memory. That's another
Yeah,
reason I'm not a good opera singer.
me also.
Yeah, is that right? Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
bad with names.
Especially here in Norway, the names are not like Peter, James, and John. They're Norwegian names, and if I don't write it down, it's a total lost cause.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Yeah. Well, let's see. I had some tough students. I had students who were, well, a lot of students at the age of college have, I don't want to say psychological issues, but they are going through a lot. And sometimes,
As a good friend of mine who's often your age once told me, people that age, they're going through the necessary ego development to become who they'll be later in life.
that's a good way to put it. But it's not easy. I remember being in college and just being a total mess. I needed to talk to somebody. And so a lot of my students, not a lot, but some students were seeing therapists, which was great because I am not a therapist. I could listen and I would listen, but I always said, this is not a problem that I can really help you solve. I can help you sing. We can talk about life. We can do positive things, but I can't be a therapist for you. So that was good because they found one time I met a therapist of a couple of my students and she said, "Oh, you're the other therapist." I said, "Well, no, not really, but thank you." So I mean, those were hard things. Those were difficult times for those students, and it didn't make it easier to teach them, but I remember them. I remember them as interesting people, and a couple of them have gone on to become very fine performers. One gal sings here locally in venues. We have a lot of bars and but nice open spaces outside venues. She sings there, and she's a fabulous singer. She's not singing classical music, but I resisted that initially, I would say, to let students sing pop music. And we never let them do that exclusively because we were trying to teach a technique that would help them in every kind of music. I still believe that. But it became very obvious that people needed to be able to sing the kind of music that moved them, that they felt drawn to, that they wanted to perform, rather than some classical ideal that I think I still love, but it's not for everyone, and nor should it be necessarily. So those were interesting people.
I'm really glad you just said what you said. It was good for me to hear because really all I want to do is just play Bach on my beautiful Baroque organ in my church and totally be idealistic. But there's more to this job that I just started than that, and they want me to do things other than that. And so thank you for reminding me that that all sorts of music touches people's souls in different ways, and no need to be snobby or selfish. or only what Patrick wants. Yeah.
Well, I know, but we do things for ourselves too, and I think that's fine. But I'm reminded Tony Griffey is an opera singer that's from this area. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a wonderful tenor, and
he was at Houston Grand Opera when I was there. I saw him in Die Fledermaus.
Oh, fun! Yeah,
He was very funny.
he's a wonderful guy. He's just, you would love him if you got to know him personally. He's really nice, and he used to say, he did some master classes here, and I heard him other places say, be sure you sing to express, not to impress. Which I thought was really great. I mean, that's what we want to do. We want to, and it's sort of like your organ playing at your church. You it's beautiful music, but you also use it to serve people. And I think that's important. I've heard it said too that when you're performing, you never know who's listening or what they need. It may be, you just think you're singing for the women's club or a bunch of old people at church, and somebody can need exactly what you have to bring. So it's always important to give that part of yourself. And you can be a musical snob too if you want to.
Yeah, but maybe not at the same time.
Well,
maybe
it's hard to do them both at once, but back and forth.
I was at the rest home on Tuesday beside my church, maybe just a few kilometers down the road. Every couple of weeks we go down there and do things for basically these people that are some of them have limited mobility, but they all need help, and they're all like in their late 80s, 90s. And what you just said, I felt very strongly that like I was giving them something they needed, even though perhaps I was just playing to 8 people who maybe couldn't even hear me. I was giving them something they needed. And
good for you. Well, I think that those kinds of things are so important.
But 20-year-old me, that would have been totally lost on me. I would have
well, 20-year-old me
totally missed the point.
Yeah. Well, that's it. We grow into these things, don't we? It takes a while.
But it's interesting that you were talking about how you were sort of not a therapist, but a second therapist to your students, because it is a very interesting dynamic. For example, my better half is an engineer, and there's no such thing as a student-teacher relationship in engineering where you go and confide to the teacher, whatever you're going through in life. So it is very unique how older musicians mentor younger musicians and help them along in life. And it's hard to put it into words, but it's a very different experience, what we have in this little bubble.
It is a bubble. And I think it's partly because what we do is so a part of us. Singing, certainly, that's me that's making that noise. And likewise, that's your fingers making that happen. And it's creative too. And it's emotional. I had a student once who, when she sang beautifully, she would sometimes start to sob, which was unfortunate for singing because then she couldn't continue. But it was such an emotional, I don't know if it was the release or just how beautiful it was, that it just choked her up. So we had to work through that.
Yeah. I also think that music puts us in the present moment in a way other career fields don't. And so maybe that's why students get into that place in front of their teachers to begin with, is because there's a certain level of mindfulness involved in learning a piece of music that isn't there in maybe the other parts of everyday life.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I do think it's an elevated plane of consciousness that we go into when we're experiencing music. I still like to do that. Still like to either play. I don't sing for that experience anymore, but I listen to music. We go to a lot of concerts.
And what are a couple of the most proud moments that you've ever had as a teacher, where you felt like, oh man, I did a really good job there, or like a really special moment?
I think that the culmination of some of the performances, the senior recitals or junior recitals, whatever their last recital was they had to do, you just sweat blood sometimes getting to that point. And I had students who said, I'm not doing it. I'm not going out there. I can't, they were too terrified. They were so many things. But when they did, some of them just went from here to here. Not vocally, maybe, yes, but also confidence-wise. And I can remember a couple of students that just blew me away. They were so good in their senior recital. And I would never say this. I was surprised. I didn't expect them to make that kind of sudden leap in front of an audience. And I think those were, I can't say I was proud because I did that. But I did keep pushing them. I did say, you will do this. You have to do this. Sorry. And I tried to make it as painless as possible. And so those were proud moments.
Obviously, you had a lot of super talented singers throughout your career that were like really excellent, but it sounds like the proudest moments were the ones that were the ones you kind of had to push along and give a kick in the butt and nurture, and then you saw them flower and blossom.
That's absolutely true. The others, you could just sort of almost let them go. And of course you guided them, but the ones that you really had to help, you feel like you're shaping them to a certain extent. Yeah. That's true. Very true.
I guess you had more invested in them than the ones that could just do their own thing.
Yeah, I think so. And we spent extra time, we'd have extra rehearsals so they could get comfortable being on stage, as opposed to those that just waltzed out and could sing anywhere and for anybody. And they were fun to teach too, but those ones that were harder were definitely a high point. Yeah.
I did a podcast episode with my childhood teacher, and she said I was definitely the latter one, that I had too much confidence.
Did you?
Yeah, she said she'll never forget the first day she met me when I was in the 6th grade, and I just came in and I played the biggest pieces I had found, and with a whole bunch of swagger, if you can imagine that. 6th grade Patrick.
Able to imagine that. Well, that's good. Oh. Do you still have that swagger?
I think so, yeah. Good. It gets me in trouble a lot. I've tried to dial it down.
Yeah. Well, you don't.
And here in Norway, you're not supposed to have swagger like that. You're supposed to be. I see. Everyone's sort of supposed to. Yeah. There's no tall poppies here, so I have to keep my swagger in check. But it's there.
That's good. Well, it comes out in musical ways, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Good.
One more thing about your teaching career. I knew you when you were just about to go to Germany, and then I also took a few lessons with you right after you had come back from China, and you were teaching in both situations. So what did you learn teaching and living in Germany and China?
Oh my gosh. That was one of the best experience. Those were some of the best experiences of our married life, and with the kids too. We went to Germany 3 times, and I did research leaves while I was there. So I had a project I needed to be doing, but I also taught some. Tim took students from Guilford College, and I taught some of them. And I also taught a couple of people, German nationals who wanted to take lessons. And so I, find a place where we could do that. And it's always fascinating. Now in Germany, the language was easy. Everyone spoke English, and I spoke enough German that we could get by, China was an entirely different situation.
Have
you been to China?
No, but I want to. I really want to go to China and Japan.
Yeah, I've never been to Japan either. I'd like to do that. China, we were there for a month, and we were to teach every day for, I think we had like 5 hours of teaching. Tim was teaching piano and I was teaching voice. And all of the teachers, all of the voice teachers came and watched while you taught. So it was kind of like an entire day of masterclass in a language that I do not speak, but we each had an interpreter who would, if we said something that was unclear. In singing, you can sometimes demonstrate and you don't have to talk.
Yeah. And music is a universal language to some extent.
And so they got the ideas, and we did a lot of things with breath and, that didn't require a lot of explaining, more just showing and feeling and touching. And so it was great. They treated us so well. The people there were very, very nice. This was in Inner Mongolia, which is a province up in the north east portion of, up next to Mongolia, actually. So it was a huge city, about 2 or 3 million people. As far as I know, there was no newspaper. We never saw a post office. Our daughter tried to mail something to us. We never got it. I don't think some of those systems were in place. Everybody had a cell phone. This was in 2012. So they had never had a phone in their home. They went straight from nothing to cell phones. And they were so, what's the word? They were so deferential to us. Not only we were the specialists, the master teachers, we were old. we were past the age of most of the teachers. They have to retire at a certain age.
In all fields or only in music?
Well, I don't know. I just knew. Yeah, that was the idea. And so they treated us like geriatrics, actually, helping me up the stairs when I went up on the stage, But
you would have been like 50 at that point, right?
Well, thank you, but I was a little older than that.
Yeah, but you weren't in your 70s.
I was not in my 70s, no. And but anyway, so it was really a lot of fun, and I learned stuff. Some of them sang Chinese songs for me, which was great. I tried to learn throat singing, the where you sing really a low pitch and then high overtones start to appear. You know what I'm talking about?
I don't. Yeah, send me a good YouTube link of the Chinese singing, and I'll put it in the description box so people can check out what you're talking about. I did remember that I played for one singer you had, and maybe was she from China or somewhere else? And she was trying to sing Western voice, and it was very difficult for her to shift into the Western vocal tradition.
Yes. And they wanted to learn that. That's what we were teaching. They wanted to learn Western techniques. And they had worked on it, but some of them still sang in that kind of high nasal pop. Well, I call it almost a pop sound. And they would do concerts like that. Oh my gosh, with microphones. It was such an experience. And we ate food I have never imagined eating. I don't even know what some of it is, and I didn't really want to know. But it was good. And you just went along, you did what everybody did. It was fascinating. It was exhausting. It's always hard to be in another culture because you're on all the time.
Yes, I just got back from a staff trip to Rome where we were speaking only in Norwegian the whole week. So yes, I'm going to be tired for the next month from that trip.
Yeah, my brain got tired,
Yes.
So, yeah. But what a wonderful experience. And we got to know a married couple that taught voice there. And a couple of years later, they came to the United States while I was teaching and did a residence at UNCG for a year.
Wow.
And they're such wonderful people. We talk about governments, but this has nothing to do with the government.
The people are always different than whatever we hear on the news, for sure. Yeah. And when I talk to people back in the US about living here in Norway. Depending on what news people listen to, they have some sort of impression of Norway as either heaven or hell, and it's neither one. It's just life. It's a different philosophy. There are different policies, but people are people. There are cultural differences, but it's neither heaven nor hell. It's just Norway.
Yeah, just Norway. Well, that's right. That's how I felt in Germany too. And so many things I liked. You can't transplant that here. They haven't been able to yet. Maybe someday.
Well, if you could transplant all the good things to one place, there wouldn't be any reason to travel.
That's right. and traveling was so important. I can't stress that enough, that I was very lucky. I was lucky. I was privileged. When I was a little girl, we took a trip every summer with my family for 2 weeks in the car without seatbelts, may I say. They hadn't been invented yet. And we went all over the country, wherever we could get in 2 weeks and have a vacation and come home. And so maybe that bug of traveling was already in me. And then when we started traveling, Tim and I, we've just done as much as we can. We try to go.
Well, speaking of Tim, I know you met Tim when you were in your mid to late 20s. And I know that was another huge turning point in your life. You were talking about you being in college and shifting from English to music. And then we kind of talked about your whole life and your career in teaching. But now let's go back to your 20s. And so I guess you were either finishing your doctorate or you had completed your doctorate and you decided to marry Tim. So tell us about that part in your life.
Well, I only had a master's. I got my master's at Colorado. Okay. And I finished that, and I thought, well, maybe I could find a college job, because that's what I wanted to do. I had taught public school, and I wanted to teach voice at the college level. So I applied I bet I sent out 35 applications. I mean, in those days, you had to send a dossier with photos and tapes and all kinds of stuff. And so I sent out 35. I got one interview, and I got the job.
Oh,
I know. And it was at Stevens College in Columbia, Missouri. And my first day, I'm moving in, and a guy across the hall comes over, and he says, I understand you're a singer, and I'm a pianist, and if you ever need an accompanist, I would love to play for you. And that was Tim Lindemann.
Okay.
And so I thought, oh, he was very good looking. He still is. And oh my gosh, we sort of hit it off. And so we spent those 2 years performing together and learning how to teach together. And he was doing a doctorate at Indiana in music theory. So he said that after we decided to get married, we got married after 2 years. It wasn't exactly a whirlwind, but a little bit.
I think anytime you go through the 4 seasons with somebody, then you know them. After all 4 seasons with someone, then you can start thinking about it. That's my personal opinion. So 2 years is fine.
We weren't 19 or 20, We were both. He's a couple years older than I am. So he was probably 29 and I was 27. And it was time. So I went with him to Indiana, and I started my doctorate there. Couldn't get a job, couldn't do anything. But it was great. It was the best decision, not undecision, that I've ever made, because that helped me get jobs later. That's when we started seriously looking for college teaching jobs. Stevens College had some financial difficulties at that point, and it looked like they were going to do away with the music department because it's expensive. So we said, okay, we've got to go somewhere else. So then we started, and we decided, this is kind of tells you more about Tim than anything. We decided whoever gets a job, we will go there. And the other person can teach privately or find other things to do, teach in the public schools, so that's what we did.
Now that's sort of like a common solution with a partnership, but back then it would have been very rare for a man to have that sort of equality in a relationship, right?
That's how I feel about it. And he was always like that in every aspect. He cooks more than I do because I don't cook, and he, cleans and does the laundry and irons, and there's nothing that is a traditional woman's role that he wouldn't do.
So he's good looking and he cleans and cooks and he's nice to you.
Yes, and he plays the piano.
And he plays the piano for you.
You see why I might have thought, aha.
Well, I know also you didn't change your name when you got married. And I know also back then that would have been a little bit more untraditional. So is there any juicy gossip around that whole scenario?
Oh, yes, a lot. When I got married, my parents came to the wedding, of course, and my dad wanted to write a check for a present to us. And he wanted to sign it to me. And he said, Nancy Lindeman, right? I said, well, no, I'm going to keep Walker, your last name. He about had a fit.
Huh.
My own father, it's his name. And that's why that generation would never have done that.
Absolutely.
So he found that completely wrong. Now it's very common.
Can you kind of take us through what went on inside of you and what gave you the courage to say, no, I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to be Nancy Walker.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Damn it. Well, I think I was old enough then. And my parents were very funny. Before you were married, you were the daughter. You were kind of not under their thumb because they didn't dictate, but they told me what to do when I was at home. It was you fell into those old roles, I guess. Mm. But since I had moved on my own, I'd lived on my own for several years by that point. And I just thought, no, you'll come around to this. And they did. And they did. And they were so happy that I was getting married.
Oh, they worried that they were going to have to take care of you for the rest of your life or something like that?
Oh, they were worried that I would be an old maid. That my mom thought I would never get married. She really worried about that. Now, I have girls that I don't know if they'll get married, and I want them to be happy.
I come from a town of 2,000 people, so twice the size of yours. I come from a city compared to you.
That's right, uptown.
That's funny because back in university, I felt so insecure that I came from such a small place, but wanted this big thing called classical music. If I had known you came from such a small place, that would have been helpful. You should have put it on your door.
I should put it on the door. I grew up in a town of 1,000. Top that.
But yeah, my parents had a lot of, not my mom so much, but my dad, he was kind of more like your dad. Like, okay, life is 2 + 2 = 4. Do this, don't do this. And, oh, you're going to do that? Absolutely not. No, I'm going to do it anyway. And then explosion. Yeah. And then, hopefully they come around in the end.
Yeah. And they were really good about unconditional love. They didn't withdraw and say, oh, well, you're not our daughter anymore, or any of that. I was very lucky that way. So that makes a huge difference. We had our explosions, but they never tore things completely apart.
Well, what family doesn't have explosions?
Exactly. That's right. And the important thing is to always be there when it's really tough.
But you were just talking about your daughters. And so I know at some point y'all moved to Greensboro. So, okay, take us from Indiana to Greensboro, and then let's talk about your daughters and the community that you developed in Greensboro.
We found a job. I found a job in Minnesota at Gustavus Adolphus College. It was a 3-year appointment. So we went up there, and Tim finished writing his dissertation and got pretty much done with his degree, not entirely. And I taught, and then I worried that I wouldn't be able to find a job when that job was done. So I started looking, and that's when I found the Greensboro job. And it was it was a dream job, really. Great students, lovely colleagues, a beautiful climate and surroundings, a nice sized town. So we were really very happy. And Tim willingly and gladly, I think, came along and he found a job teaching part-time at Guilford College. He turned that into full-time. He eventually became the chair of the music department at Guilford College, and he got full professor before I did. Can I just say that?
So let that be a lesson in humility, that if you're willing to just go where life takes you or your better half, then yeah, it might seem like you're going a step backwards, but in the end, maybe you end up coming out ahead.
It's all going to equal out. Exactly. Yes. So yeah, we have had kind of a charmed life in that way. And I was still finishing my dissertation and taking classes as I started this job here. Still had a couple of years left. So I put off having children. I think Tim was probably a little more eager to get that going. And I just thought, I can't be pregnant and writing a dissertation. I don't think I can do it. I teach, and I know I can't do it. So I said, when I get my degree, then okay. Mm-hmm. So I finally got it in 88, and we started trying to get pregnant. And we got pregnant, and then I lost that baby. It was a very tough time. That's probably the hardest thing that we went through, because I was very pregnant. And so we didn't know what to do. So we tried again, of course, and we got our daughter, Kelsey. And so, sadness followed by overwhelming joy. And she's been a special daughter from the get-go. And then we thought, well, we can't just have one. We got to have more than one. So
obviously.
But I was not a child at this point. Those of you who know what I was 38 when the first one was born. So that's up there. And then we had trouble getting and staying pregnant. This is more than you want to know, probably, but
no, I'm actually really interested because I have several close girlfriends. So one lost a baby recently and one's been trying to get pregnant for years and hasn't been able to. So actually, I'm very interested in what you're saying right now because maybe it'll help me find the right words to say to them.
Yeah, it's not easy. And we get pregnant and then miscarriage, and part of that I think was my age, but it's hard to say. We went to specialists. We did a crazy specialist where I flew to Chicago 2 or 3 times, taking Tim's blood with me. And then it was injected into me because the doctor believed that Tim and I were too much alike in not blood type, but in something in our DNA. And it was stopping my body from allowing this child to grow.
I'm not being judgmental, but was that like based in science or was that like
he was a doctor?
Because it sounds a little bit like poppycock.
It sounds crazy. And I think that it's not proven, but he had a wall of pictures of women who'd gotten pregnant.
And I guess you were willing to do anything at that point.
We were willing to do anything. And it wasn't dangerous. And our doctor gave the okay. She had heard this guy talk and said, I don't know if it's workable or not, but why don't you go try? And so we did. It was cheaper than in vitro fertilization, for sure. And lo and behold, I got pregnant. And,
so it wasn't poppycock.
Well, it worked. Or at least I got pregnant and kept the baby, and that's our Chloe.
So there's something to be said for things that sound crazy working out.
And that was about the craziest thing I've ever done. And who knows? I was 43 when she was born, and everything was wonderful, and I wouldn't trade her for the world. So both girls are musical, but they both chose to go into science. And when they were young, we had been church musicians, and I was singing all over the town, Christian Science, First Pres, whoever needed a soloist or a fill-in member of the choir. And Tim was doing the same thing as an organist and pianist, whatever. And when we had Kelsey, we started having a little different thought about community. I wasn't sure I wanted her to be raised in the Sunday school while I was singing in a church that I didn't necessarily have any connection to or believe in, or except they were paying me on Sunday.
Absolutely.
So we decided that we would look for a church, a faith community where we could just go and not be musicians, just go and be regular people and have a community, and our kids could get to know Bible stories or whatever, we found. And that seemed important too, to have that background. Because so much of literature and is based on biblical stories and things that we know from that tradition.
Absolutely. And even just all through pop culture, things that you don't even think about, like my better half is from India. And when I'm asked like, okay, where does this phrase come from? Like on a sitcom, I have to think about it. And I think, oh, that's from the Bible, actually.
It permeates our culture. I mean, it's not the only thing, but it's certainly important. So we started looking around, and it seemed like everywhere that we went for a Sunday, people would say, oh, you're musicians. Would you like to conduct the choir? Would you like to be our soloist? Would you like to play the organ? And we just said, very flattering, but that's not what we're looking for. Yeah. So then we went to the Quaker meeting. I'd never been to a Quaker meeting before. And the preacher there, it's an odd Quaker meeting. Most Quakers sit in silence for an hour.
Wait, first, can we just backtrack? Can you just tell people what is a Quaker?
Okay.
Because I think most people, when they hear Quaker, they think of oatmeal.
Of course they do.
Give us a little background.
Well, the Quakers were started by a man in England in the 1600s, and it gradually came over to the United States. And it is basically a completely non-hierarchical faith that believes that there is that of God in everyone. That would be a basic tenet. And no one is better than someone else. So this man in England refused to take his hat off to the king or to lords and ladies. And he used the plain speech of the Quakers, which is thee and thou. And that's where that all comes from. Heard of thee, and it's kind of sounds like biblical talk, but it's how the Quakers spoke. Because it's not an informal and a formal. It's everybody's informal.
That was very radical for England back in the 1600s.
Can you imagine? Well, and they were killed for it. Oh, well, he wasn't, but some of the people who espoused that were. But it grew here in Philadelphia, city of brotherly love,
Okay, that's why it's called that?
I think that, yeah, there's a lot of, and there are more Friends Quaker churches meetings in Philadelphia maybe than anywhere in the United States, I would guess. Although it's grown, it's a very small sect. And there are all kinds of Quakers. Our meeting, the idea is that when you sit in silence, and men and women are equal, so you don't have to sit on one side or the other, or women can be pastors and can speak in meeting. And
would that was the women be equal? Was that all the way back in the 1600s also?
As much as it could be.
As much as it could be, yeah.
They were friends to everybody. During the Revolutionary War, they cared for the British and the American soldiers. They buried them in graves. They gave burial to all of them. They try not to take sides. They're a peace-loving group. They're you could say they are against war. War is not the answer is a familiar phrase that we hear.
I've read a couple of books by Parker Palmer.
Oh, I was just going to talk about Parker Palmer. I'm glad you know him.
Yeah, one of the big things that I took from his book about the Quaker tradition that I found fascinating was that you try to do everything by consensus. So, like, majority rule isn't so important as, like, let's all sit here and discuss this thing until we're blue in the face and actually come to 100% agreement. Does that actually work in real life?
Well, yes and no, because it's rarely 100%, and people are all just yay, yay, yay. There are people who might disagree very strongly with a decision that is being discussed. The important thing is that that person is heard. They get to say what they believe, and there's a lot of discussion. It takes an inordinate amount of time to make some big decisions because they are the importance of letting everybody have their say is enormous. So if we come to a consensus and there seems to be a lot of agreement in the room, you just kind of feel that, the clerk will say, I'm sensing that there will be approval for this. And if one person raises their hand and says, well, I can't approve it, then that person can either say, but I will stand aside so that it can move forward. I will not get in the way of it. Or they can say, I don't want this to happen. I will block this. And that will shut it down.
So each person has veto power. And if that person feels so strongly, then that's it. It doesn't happen.
I think that's right. Now, there would be continued discussion, I promise you. Attempts to, especially if it's just one person and it seems, that they might be swayed and usually they will stand aside. Sometimes the rift is so great they will leave the meeting. It's such an important thing. And we have had some really difficult decisions, not in our particular meeting, but within the group of meetings to which we belong.
But I love the idea of saying, I don't agree with this. I don't like it, but I'll stand aside. You get to keep your self-respect and your values, but also say, okay, for the good of the group, I'll stand aside. So you're not pretending. It's not like a false harmony, which later breeds resentment. People know, like, I don't like it, but I'll stand aside. I'm able
to live with it. Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's compromise. I think that's what the best kind of compromise is. And we seem to have wandered far away from that in some areas of the country and some areas of our lives, maybe.
And do you and Tim ever say, I don't agree with this, but I'll step aside at home?
To each other?
Yeah.
I've never said that out loud. I have thought, I can let this go. It's not that big a deal. I think it's perspective, How important is it? If it were something about our daughter's lives or something, that, of course, that would be different. But if it's like, should we let the dog bark or should we try to make him be quiet?
And another thing that I learned, not from Parker Palmer, but from actually my university professor at UNCG, I think we were required to take a religion class in undergraduate. He taught us that Quakers believe in the inner light of everyone. And that was pretty much all he said. But I mean, he tried to explain it, but he couldn't, as in he was like, okay, this is just an unexplainable thing they believe in, but it's interesting because in your teaching, I see a very bright inner light within you. And it makes me think of the children's Sunday school song, This Little Light of Mine, I'm going to let it shine. But yeah, can you tell us anything about what you've learned about the inner light and how the rest of us can use it, not just Quakers?
Of course, everybody can use it. It's not anything except that you you see something good in everyone. I think at its basest level, that's it. Or, I mean, when I said there is that of God in everyone, that's that light. And there is a lot of just a lot of use of the word light in Quaker theology, if you want to call it that. But it's not that I can see a light, but I can see the good in most people. I must admit there are some people I have a harder time seeing the light in, but.
So how do you see the light when the light doesn't shine as brightly? Do you have any strategies?
No.
I have my list of people as well.
Yeah. I think one thing that I try to do is I try to hold them in the light. That is something else that we do. If someone's sick, I will write to them and say, I will hold you in the light. Meaning I will try to imagine. I mean, it's only an imagination thing for me, and maybe real for some people, that I am enfolding that person in a light that might lift them up, might help them feel better. Do I believe that prayer will cure a person? It can. People like to be held in the light. And if they're a person whose light is not shining, at least for me, sometimes I need to look at me and see what it is that I'm not allowing myself to see in that person. That's a harder thing to do, to always turn it around. But I think that's very Quakerly.
So maybe their inner light is just fine and yours is out.
Perhaps that's right. Or I have some kind of sunglasses on that I'm blind to their light. Or I don't want to see them because I don't like them. Or I don't like their policy. Or, there are lots of reasons to say that person has no light. But I try not to say that.
And some people, you just see them and you just don't like them. And there's no reason. That's not just me, right?
No, it's not. I mean, this is a human condition. This is something that we all struggle with. And some of them, there are people like that in our meeting. Aren't there people like that in your church?
In my apartment complex, of course, there's this one guy. Oh my God, he's just so angry, and I just want to run every time I see him. I really don't like him, and he doesn't like me. He doesn't like my dog.
Oh, yeah. Well, I have no advice for you, except I just imagine why he's so angry. That's what I try to do. Why is that person so unhappy?
That's holding someone in the light, trying to see things from their perspective.
That's part of it. Yes. Yeah. And that's not easy. And I'm not sure that it does anything for that person, but it might do something for me. It's so funny that you brought up Parker Palmer, because I was just reading this.
Which is On the Brink of Everything?
Yes.
Grief. Which one is that one? Grief.
Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old.
I think he's like 90 now, right?
He's 85. What
have you learned from Grief, Gravity, and Getting Old?
What did I get from it?
Yeah, from On the Brink of Everything.
I haven't finished it, but it actually kind of reminded me of your book, because it's short essays. Yeah. And they're things that he has thought about all of his life. They're not answers to anything. They're just maybe new ways of looking at something, but they're dense little nuggets of truth. And that's what I found in your book, is that those little, things that you can take home. They're not, there might be universal truths too, but they make you stop and think, which is part of what he's talking about. And,
I take that as very high praise. Very high praise.
I it's so funny because Parker Palmer.
Yes.
Can you imagine that?
That's not lost on me.
I thought not.
I think you and I would be friends if we ever met. I've read all of his books. So
have you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope that's not the reason I reminded you of him. I hope I didn't plagiarize him.
Oh no, that was not it. Um, it's
But yeah, he's great.
yeah, I think he's good and he's got a lot to say and yeah,
Maybe I'm a Quaker then.
I think you might be. Good, good. Well, you might want to read some stuff because it's very interesting to me. I've learned so much, and I was not born as a Quaker, so I had a lot to learn. And our meeting is different from other Quaker meetings in that we actually have a pastor and we have somebody who brings a message, like a sermon, every week. And we even have a choir and an organ. Many Quaker meetings have no music, no preacher, no sermon.
Do some of them have, in my part of the country, they had the shape note singing in the Primitive Baptist Church? Do some Quakers have that, where there's no music, but they can sing in 4-part harmony?
I don't think that was a Quaker thing. It was certainly about that same time. And there might have been some crossover, but most Quakers did not sing in meeting. So it wouldn't be so likely. I don't know the actual answer to that. They may have sung some, and shape note would be likely. But did you learn to do that? I never learned to do that.
My granddaddy grew up in a Primitive Baptist church, and he went there his whole life, and he could do it, but I never went there. He asked me to go, but I never went. But we had a shape note hymnal in my church growing up, but there was a pianist there.
I see.
And she played with her pinkies up every Sunday.
Oh my gosh, that's wild.
I was so enthralled by her. She was right up there with God for me. So I would go home every Sunday after church, and I would get out the hymnal, and I would imitate her as closely as I could, even though I couldn't read music or read words. And yeah, she was my hero.
Oh my gosh, your first mentor. Mentoress. Yes. Oh, how neat. Well, that's what I'm talking about. You never know who you're going to be a mentor to, even if you don't mean to be.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's right.
And she was just like the wife of a farmer and just a normal down home, total country woman of her time. And yeah, she just happened to know how to play the piano. And
my church organist, when I was growing up, had fingernails that were this long.
Oh, wow.
They kind of
over an inch.
They wrapped around the keys, and you would hear them clacking when she played. She was actually a pretty good keyboard player, but oh my gosh, it was crazy.
I totally digressed. You were talking about how you found the Quaker church, and I guess they didn't ask you to sing or play the piano, and so you stayed.
That's right. I mean, we did end up doing some music there, but not for money. Just because we wanted to share, and our kids have played the piano or the violin there, and it's been a fabulous community for us. Our girls had kids their age, and it wasn't a stuffy Sunday school kind of situation. They had a group every Wednesday night they called Wine, WHINE, and Cheese. Wine and cheese. And they would go and just talk about everything, and they had a young, dynamic youth leader. And, that was her whole life, Chloe's whole life, really. Kelsey did it some too, but it was so good for them.
Church youth groups are a good thing for kids that age.
It really was important for them. I mean, it shaped their lives in some ways. And so aren't we glad we chose well?
So maybe you sacrificed a little bit of money here and there from playing and singing in church, but you got that instead, which was much more worthy.
So much more important. Yeah. We didn't need to make more money. I mean, we had 2 good jobs, and, you can always say, well, I could use a little more money.
Yeah, but I think even billionaires think that. I think money is a very tricky, very slippery slope.
I have a great story, and it's about an author, and I don't remember who it was, but he was talking to another author, and they were saying, "Oh, that guy that wrote the the screenplay, he got $1 million for doing that. Doesn't that kind of make you mad? And the first author said, I have something that he'll never have. I have enough. I love that. I feel like I have enough. I mean, I'm lucky because I do, but I try to remain grateful. That's another thing I'd like to say. How grateful I am just for my life and for people like you and students and just wonderful experiences and people I've known. So thank you. Thanks for having me do this.
That's it for this week's podcast. If you'd like to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/PatrickAAParker. And while supplies last, I'll send you a free Audible version of my book, Becoming Who You Truly Are, with your subscription. Thank you so much for watching and listening. And until the next episode, I wish you nothing but the best in your life's journey to becoming all that you truly are.